Welcome to Walking D-Day. Today we're going to visit Hill 314 at Mortain and the surrounding area during Operation Luttich. So let's get going. Operation Cobra broke through the German line of resistance and the Americans started moving rapidly. Although the Germans were now retreating rapidly, minefields and knocked out vehicles hindered the Allied advance. Patton had come into Normandy on the 6th of July and now was given the task of commanding the 8th Corps to exploit the breakout. He launched the 4th and the 6th Armoured Divisions to head south. By the 1st of August they were in Brittany and also pivoting to head east. Bradley realised that the narrow corridor along the west coast of the peninsula needed to be enlarged. The 1st Division was sent to hold Mortain. They arrived on the 3rd of August. Hitler had a great idea. From back in Germany, he saw that the counter-attacking to Avranches would cut off the supplies to the American troops to the south. Von Kluge, in situ in Normandy, saw that it wouldn't be so easy as they had lost so many tanks against the British around Caen in Operation Goodwood, and the British had just launched their breakout, Operation Bluecoat, but he had to comply. The 1st Division took Mortain relatively easily against the remnants of the Panzer, while there was more resistance on the line from Vire to Saint-Poix. One of the last Germans in Mortain was shot by a French policeman with a 19th century rifle. It was tempting to let the 1st Division continue southwest towards Domfront and Le Mans, but their position was a threat to the flanks of the German forces to their north, so they were told to consolidate their position. The 30th Division was sent in to replace the 1st Division so that the 1st would be free to continue their advance. The 117th Regiment was around St. Barthelemy. The 120th occupied Mortain and the Hill 314 just to the east, giving them a great view across the terrain. They were disappointed that the 1st Division men hadn't made more substantial defence preparations. The CP, the 2nd Battalion, was set up in the Hotel de la Poste in town. North of the 30th Division was the 9th, on the north bank of the River Seille. Von Kluge understood the objective of Luttich as being to stem the American advance, while he hoped a strong defence position would be prepared to his rear. He planned Operation Luttich to start late on the 6th. Hitler then explained that the idea was to take Avranches, then head northeast to push back the American front line. Hitler wanted 8 of the 9 Panzer divisions in Normandy to take part. That would mean delaying the attack 24 hours. Von Kluge was ready to launch, and OKW was still preparing its plans. Von Kluge was worried that the positions could be obliterated by Allied bombing if they waited. Reluctantly, Hitler gave the go-ahead. The weather forecast predicted mist in the morning of the 7th of August, which would help the surprise attack. The afternoon should be clearer, allowing Luftwaffe bombers to support the attack. The 3rd US Armoured Division and the 30th Infantry Division would take the brunt of an assault from over 130 tanks. Once Avranches was taken, the German Infantry Division would retake Bressy. The attack was to be launched without any artillery barrage and with only a brief regrouping of tanks before the assault to gain maximum surprise. The start of Luttich was highly disorganised. The 116th were to pass a battalion of tanks to the 2nd Panzers, but Lieutenant General Schwerin just ignored the order. Tanks that were supposed to head to the start line were already engaged with the Allies. The 1st SS Panzers were to exploit the success, but were still just passing through Tancherbray. An Allied plane had smashed into the lead tank, holding up their advance for 2 hours. 8 hours put back from 2200 hours to midnight. To cap it all, there was no secret, as the Allies had Ultra to inform them of the Germans' intentions. US Air Corps and the RAF were on alert to send fighter bombers when needed. One hick in the American response was that the 30th Division weren't informed of the impending attack. The German plan was for the 116th Panzers to attack along the north bank of the River Seine. The 2nd Panzer Division would attack along the south bank through St. Barthelemy, and the Das Reich both sides of Mortain. Then the 1st SS Panzers would arrive to exploit the success of the first assault. Just after midnight, Company G, situated north of Hill 314, was attacked by the Kampfgruppe Fick, which also dispersed Company H on the western slopes of Hill 314. The Germans took heavy casualties in these actions. At 2:35, Colonel Berg sent his reserve Company C to Hill 314. Kampfgruppe Ulrich bypassed Mortain to the north and attacked the roadblocks at the foot of Hill 285. Their advance is stopped by bazookas, anti-tank guns and tank destroyers. Wisliceniz's battle group, coming around the south of Mortain, splits into two groups. One goes straight into Mortain, the other heads towards Romagny, where they be stopped by the reconnaissance platoon of the 120th. Wisliceniz's group enters Mortain at 1:30, but it takes 8.5 hours of bitter fighting before they have Mortain. Around 5, the spearhead of Der Führer Panzer Regiment, coming from the north, takes on a roadblock near the Abbaye Blanche, manned by F Company, 120th, led by Lieutenant Andrews. Because of the hold-up due to using the same roads as the 1st SS Panzers, Weidinger decides to attack with half-tracks and Panzer Grenadiers. Lieutenant Springfield's 3-inch anti-tank guns took on the Das Reich columns as they emerged from the mist. The Germans dismounted and attacked Springfield's men. They were within a few dozen yards of the guns. The gunners used grenades to repulse the attack. Nearby GIs took on the Germans with machine guns. The tank destroyer platoon knocked out 6 half-tracks and other vehicles, and the attack was halted. The Americans were also using the defence positions abandoned by the Germans a few days earlier. Lieutenant Stewart with Company F had to retreat from their positions at Mortain. They reinforced the defences around the Abbaye Blanche from attacks from the south. Around dawn, Major General Hobbs sent Lieutenant Colonel Lockett's 2nd Battalion, 117th, to retake Mortain. They had 4 Shermans in support, but can't break through. Later in the day, he sends Company E to reinforce the Abbaye Blanche roadblock. Early in the war, children had been evacuated from Cherbourg as it risked being bombed to peaceful Mortain. Now they found themselves in the middle of one of the fiercest battles in Normandy. With 800 of the inhabitants of Mortain, they were sheltering in the galleries of an iron mine at Cambrémont. Farmers had left their farm to go down the mine, but the cows still had to be milked. One person would go out to milk the cows of several farms. Sometimes they didn't come back. At 1300 hours on the 7th, Funk orders Das Reich to consolidate the positions. They don't hold Hill 314, the Abbaye Blanche, or Saint-Hilaire du Arquet. The 2 artillery observers on Hill 314 can order a rain of fire onto the Germans. Half the tanks involved in Luttich were Panzers and the others were Mark IVs. The Panzers were the spearhead, as their frontal armour was impervious to most American anti-tank weapons. They were vulnerable from the side. St. Barthelemy was held by Lieutenant Colonel Franklin's 1st Battalion, 117th. The 3rd Battalion were behind them in the northwest, and the 2nd Battalion had been sent to join the 120th at Mortain. Now they'd arrived in St. Barthelemy on the 6th in the afternoon. Companies A and C were actually in the town. Company B was further to the west at the hamlet of Le Foutelet. Around midnight, a German scouting party, accompanied by a few tanks, arrived, knocked out a 57mm gun, and the infantry retreated 200 yards to the south. The divisional artillery halted the attack. At 6 o'clock, an attack was mounted along the roads into St. Barthelemy from the south and the east. Due to the fog, the tanks could get to within near point-blank range before they were seen. By radio, Franklin contacted Companies A and C and told them to let the tanks pass and then attack the infantry. Then the town was hit by Leibstandarte tanks from the north. Franklin's command posts were surrounded. Through the back window, he saw 2 radio men being led away by Germans. He dashed out with a pistol in each hand and shot 2 German officers. He realised it was pointless to try and establish defence here. With his officers, he raced back to Company B to establish radio contact with the forward companies. The appearance of Allied planes in the sky hampered the German attack and allowed 75 men of the 2 forward companies to retreat. The Panzer Grenadiers were dismayed that the promised Luftwaffe support never arrived. As the mist cleared, they saw about 20 Jabos circling around. In turn, each plane would leave the circle to attack the Panzers. When no more Panzers were moving, they strafed the infantry. This house in St. Barthelemy is using the Panzer gun barrel as an ornament. The farthest advance on the 7th was made by Kampfgruppe Schack. They advanced so far because they were advancing in the boundary between the 30th and the 9th Division, which was lightly defended. Their objective was Mesnil Adelée, which is that way. In the dark, around 4 a.m, a reconnaissance unit approached the town. There was a few trucks of the 4th Division in town. The Panzer Grenadiers dismounted, infiltrated the town and took it over. A group of Panzers was sent north towards Chancy-le-Roussel to help with that attack, and the others went this way, west, towards the Mesnil Adelée. It wasn't defended because it was in the boundary between the 90th and the 9th Division. B Company of the 119th was sent to set up a roadblock to the southwest, which is that way, outside the town. Lieutenant Colonel Brown led the 3rd Battalion to retake Mesnil Tove. The Germans in Mesnil Adelée were taken on by American tanks just by chance. The 67th Armoured Regiment of the 2nd Armoured Division was refitting near Pont Brocard, and they were on a 55-mile route march to Domfront. They saw the tanks of Kampfgruppe Schack in Mesnil Adelée and took them on with self-propelled guns, priests and tank killers. They claimed 4 German tanks. Honorable Schack was killed in this attack. Later in the morning, the 8th Regiment of the 4th Division moved into Mesnil-Guilbert. That was the same unit that landed on Utah Beach. So the 67th Regiment, they carried on their way to Domfront by scouting round further south to avoid the Germans. The first Allied fighter bombers reached this area late morning. The general plan was for the Americans to attack the transport convoys and the Luftwaffe, and for the Typhoons to attack the Panzers. But some Thunderbolts did attack the Germans in this area. A dozen Thunderbolts attacked Kampfgruppe Schack and claimed 6 tanks. In fact, a few tanks were damaged. They also attacked some German troops, and some Typhoons damaged some of the 67th Regiment's tanks. A lot of confusion. Tanks of the 3rd Armoured Division were sent to mount a surprise attack from the south, which is coming from that way, and then an attack from the north. Those attacks convinced Major Mayer, who'd taken over from Oberst Schack, to pull out of Mesnil Adelée. And on the way back to Mesnil Tove, which is that way, they were spotted by a spotter plane, and then some 155 howitzers were firing on them, knocked out several tanks and trucks. The 116th Panzer attack got off to a bad start due to General Schwerin's lackluster command, confusion of being replaced by the 84th Infantry, and some tanks being borrowed by the 2nd Panzers. Kampfgruppe Sonder launched the attack against Chancy-le-Roussel. The town was held by men of the 9th Division and tanks of the 746th Tank Battalion. At 22:30, 2 reconnaissance motorcycles stumbled into the town and were knocked out. The Americans were also alerted by the noise of Kampfgruppe Schack at Mesnil Tove. The attack by Sonder began at 0200 hours from Monturgon. The Germans pushed back the American defence line, but failed to take the village. As mentioned earlier, tanks from Mesnil Tove were directed to come to assist, but the Americans regained the terrain lost. General Funk contacted Schwerin by phone and accused the division of cowardice. He then contacted von Klug and got Schwerin replaced. Morning mist hampered Allied air activity. The patrol of 2 Typhoons found a gap in the fog and saw a column of nearly 5 miles long heading west. With 4 Panzer divisions in the attack, this was the greatest formation of German tanks ever seen in Normandy. They radioed for more aircraft. Just after midday, 60-pound rocket attacks started in the Cherinsey-St Barthelemy area. Low cloud around Mortain limited attacks in that area. 305 Typhoon sorties claimed 90 tanks destroyed and 59 damaged plus 51 vehicles. One should keep in mind that claimed hits always exceeded actual hits, but just the presence of Typhoons and near misses would often cause crews to drive to shelter or even abandon the tanks. The USAF conducted 400 sorties in the area, mainly against transport convoys. They claimed 13 tanks, 98 trucks, 90 horse-drawn vehicles. The Luftwaffe action was postponed till 1400 hours, but was hampered by dogfights and attacks on the airfields around Chartres. The 120th, in the Mortain area, reported 10 attacks by rocket-firing FW-190s. Even though claimed hits outnumbered real hits, the effect of the Typhoon rocket attacks is undeniable. General von Lutwitz of the 2nd Panzer Division said, "They came in their hundreds, firing their rockets. We could do nothing and make no progress." 7th of August became known as the Day of the Typhoons. The surprise attack having stalled, success was now impossible. The Americans could build up forces faster than the Germans. The 30th Division was in a precarious position. Mortain had been retaken by the Das Reich, but Hill 314 was still held by 3 companies of the 120th, plus elements of another 3 companies. They were commanded by Captain Eriksson. There's a confusion on the name of the hill. Some say 314 and some say 317. There are in fact two summits on the hill. The locals called it Montjoie. From the summit, joyous pilgrims could see their goal, which was Mont Saint-Michel, 30 miles away. Most attacks were launched from the east, as the western side was a steepish cliff. There was a road that ran across the southern end, which allowed the use of tracked vehicles. Kampfgruppe Fick made an attempt to overrun the hill in a pre-dawn attack, thinking that the artillery would be ineffective. The observers in situ had already registered several obvious approach paths, and the attacks were crushed by shelling. The 120th men were short of ammunition, and a request was sent for an airdrop. This was going to take some time to prepare, so they first used two spotter aircraft making low passes, but suffered serious damage. During the day, one of the observers had no more dry cell radio batteries. There was now only one communication channel open. Operation Luttich hadn't planned on using much artillery. On the 8th, this became a problem for the Germans. Much of the artillery gunners had lost their guns and had to be used as infantry. The remaining 10 105mm guns and 155mm guns were consolidated under Artillery Group Ernst. This attempt to smother the resistance got off to a bad start. The artillery observer was moving forward in a Kübelwagen and ran right into an American roadblock. He told the Americans that the artillery was near Gers. Lieutenant Weiss had a 35-pound SCR 610 radio with a range of 5 miles, just enough to reach the batteries to the west. He got Corps artillery to pound the German position. Later, Das Reich sent some SB guns to support Kampfgruppe Fick, but Weiss's team saw them and an artillery fire dispersed them. At the same time, Kampfgruppe Ulrich tried to clear the Americans from Hill 285. They were discovered on the approach and the attack dispersed. Then Das Reich Mark IV tanks made another attempt at 1600 hours. One tank hit a mine and 2 were knocked out by concealed 3-inch guns. Attacks were attempted against the Abbaye Blanche roadblocks. These were repulsed with 3-inch anti-tank guns. This road leading from the railway station to the Junction roadblock was littered with German vehicles. On the 8th, elements of the 4th Division surrounded Mesnil Tove on 3 sides. This forced the Germans to pull out, but the area around Mesnil Tove up to the Abbaye Blanche remained in stalemate for 4 days. The Americans were advancing field by field. On the 9th, Hobbs sent a force from the Abbaye Blanche area to protect the junction at J278. That was this. It was called that because the height in metres was 278. There were 5 roads that joined here, so that's why it's an important junction. There was no roundabout at the time, of course. It was led by Lieutenant Colonel Hogan's 33rd Battalion of the 3rd Armoured Division. Now they came under machine gun fire, so the infantry dismounted and the tanks continued, but 4 were knocked out and so they were repulsed. But Hogan had put some artillery observers on the high land over there and they could bring in 105mm howitzer fire. As often happens when I'm making these videos, I had an interesting encounter. A man coming by spoke to me and I mentioned I was doing a video about 1944. He said, "On my house over there has shell marks in the wall." He was 7 at the time and the Americans had taken them westwards in trucks when they felt they couldn't hold the area. His house had been a stagecoach inn at one point.
Yeah. Oh, ben ça peut être dur ici.
Sûrement que c'est lui qui aurait été assis.
With Operation Luttich stalling, on the 9th, Hitler wanted to relaunch Operation Luttich, adding 3 Panzer divisions. But Operation Totalize started on the morning of the 8th. That was the Canadians pushing south from Caen, and the Americans were arriving at Mayenne, and so that never happened. The men holding out on Hill 314 lacked rations, medical supplies, ammunition, and batteries for the radios. The local farmers, also trapped, shared their chickens and the food that they had. On the 10th, an airdrop was organised for the men on Hill 314. C-47s with a fighter escort flew low and dropped 70 bundles with supplies. Half of them dropped in the German sector. The bundles the men recovered had food and ammunition in, but no batteries or medical supplies. Another method was to fire plasma and batteries in empty shell casings. This was the idea of Lieutenant Colonel Louis de Weeman. The first attempt was made in the dark and they couldn't be found. A second try was carried out in daylight on the 11th. The last push on Hill 314 was carried out by 3 battalions of the 35th Division. The task force of Major Gillis was to actually get to Hill 314, while 2 other battalions were to attack to the east to disperse the German defences. Now the Germans had guessed that the route that Major Gillis took was a good route to take to get to 314, and they'd put anti-tank guns along the hedges. And so their advance was stalled. By the evening, the 1st Battalion of the 320th Infantry, they were at the base of Hill 314. They were joined by 3 tanks from Task Force Gillis. Then those tanks returned to join the main task force. So the men of the 320th, they dug in for the night. But the advance had been helped by the fact that further to the west, Hill 285 had been retaken. The Germans started pulling out due to developments in other parts of the front. The Canadians were advancing onto Falaise. Alençon was being threatened by the American advance, and so they finally decided that to pull out. The night of the 11th saw more German artillery action than in previous nights. They were probably just expending their surplus ammunition so they could retreat more easily. A retreating column passed by the base of the Hill 314. Lieutenant Weiss saw it. He called in an artillery barrage. Between 50 and 100 vehicles were destroyed. Around 8:20 hours on the morning of Saturday, August the 12th, the 320th Infantry, 35th Division, finally reached the men of the 220th on Hill 314. From a force of 700 men, they were down to 370 steel-bearing arms. The 30th Division as a whole suffered 1,800 casualties. This retreat was going to lead to the Falaise Pocket, which would lead to the end of the Battle of Normandy.